Pastor Ed here with Daily Devotions for Wednesday, May the 10th, 2023. Continuing to look at that reading from this past Sunday, Romans 1 to 17, and particularly the first part of it where Paul talks about being called to be an apostle set apart for the gospel of God, talking about his qualifications. There's a story about a Jewish man who once applied to work for the First International Bank of Israel. And so the bank naturally asked for, among other things, a letter of recommendation. And the young Jewish man put down his rabbi as his reference. And the rabbi then was contacted, and in response, he wrote, his father came from the distinguished Goldberg family. His mother was from the respected Abrahams. Further back, there was a happy blend of Rosenbergs and Steinbergs and Levenbergs. In other words, this young man is from good Jewish stock. Several days later, however, the First International Bank of Israel sent a note to the rabbi saying, the information you supplied was altogether inadequate, unfortunately. We are not contemplating using the young man for breeding purposes, just for work. It's interesting when Paul talks about being called. There's an old phrase that comes to mind. God doesn't call the qualified. He qualifies the called. It's interesting. I was just teaching about the call of Saul, who was Paul, known as, before he became known to us as Paul, and his conversion experience on the road to Damascus, and how the first time we hear about Saul is at the very end of chapter 7, beginning of chapter 8 of the book of Acts. Stephen, the first martyr, is about to be stoned, and there's mention that there was a young man by the name of Saul. When they took their coats off to throw the stones at Stephen, he was the one who watched their coats while they were doing that, and he was consenting to his death, and great persecution rose. And then Saul, we're told a little bit later, became very zealous in his persecution of the Christians. He would even ask for special letters that he could go and arrest people and bring them back to Jerusalem and to put them into jail. And then he has this conversion experience. He does a complete turnabout. Jesus is a flash of light, and he's blinded, and the whole story there. You have to read it there in Acts 9. He also tells a story two more times. Chuck Swindoll puts it this way: his journey reversed direction, talking about Saul to become Paul. His mind did a turnaround that would ultimately transform him from the inside out. That's the essence of genuine repentance, says Swindoll. The mind does a turnaround. So many things within Saul's thinking changed completely. He changed his mind about God, about Jesus, about the resurrection, about those who followed Christ. He must have shaken his head for days. Saul thought Christ was dead. Paul shows that he was convinced that Jesus was alive. Finally, there's a great story, it's apocryphal, of course, but about a church that was in a call process to call their next pastor, and they weren't having any luck. People just, they found one excuse after another for why this person or that person would not be a good fit for them. So finally, the pastor introduced, or the head of the deacons, I should say, introduced a letter from a prospective candidate that went as follows. I'm considered to be a good preacher, and I've been a leader in most of the places that I've served. I've also done some writing on the side. I'm over 50 years old, and while my health is not the best, I still manage to get enough work done to please any parish. As for references, I'm somewhat handicapped. I've never preached anywhere for more than 3 years. Most of the churches I've preached in have been small, even though they were located in rather large cities. I had to leave some places because my ministry caused riots and disturbances. Even where I stayed, I did not get along too well with other religious leaders, which may influence the kind of references that these places will supply. I've also been threatened and physically attacked. I've even gone to jail several times for my preaching. I'm not particularly good at keeping records. I have to admit, I don't even remember all those who I've baptized. However, if you can use me, I would be pleased to be considered. I feel sure that I could bring vitality to your church. Well, when the chairman of the search committee finished reading the letter, all the committee members were naturally aghast. How could anyone think that a church like theirs would consider a man who was nothing but a troublemaking, absent-minded ex-jailbird? What was his name, they wanted to know. Well, said the chairman, the letter is signed Paul. St. Paul. Interesting. Interesting. And Paul is an interesting person. We're not going to have a whole lot of time to, well, I guess maybe we're going to be talking about Romans for several weeks, so we'll have a chance to maybe talk a little bit more about Paul. But he is obviously a giant, even though he was small in stature. And that's what Paul means, actually, little, the name, that is. He was a giant in terms of the faith, second only, obviously, to Jesus himself. Without his writings, without his influence, without his missionary journeys, there would not be the church that we know today. And so it's exciting to kind of spend some time exploring his life and his ministry, but in particular the things that he wrote. And that's what we'll be doing. And we'll continue this conversation about Romans 1:1-17 tomorrow. Hope you have a great day, and we'll see you then. Take care. Bye-bye.